Hello, I'm Pauline Davies at the Quantum Biology School of Pioneer Science in Paraty, Brazil, and with me are two cutting-edge scientists. Clarice Aiello, you're a quantum engineer born and raised in Brazil, now working in Los Angeles in the US, where you're the chief scientific officer of the Quantum Biology Institute, which I believe you started. And I know you're passionate about getting a diverse range of scientists to take part in the quantum biology enterprise. And beside you is Paul Davies. Paul, you're a theoretical quantum physicist at Arizona State University in the US, and your research has mostly been in the field of cosmology and astrophysics, but you're also intrigued by the concept of quantum biology. Is that right?
I am.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have a great conversation. But I'm going to start with Clarice. So, Clarice, tell me about the Quantum Biology Institute. What sort of research is going on there?
Okay, so the Quantum Biology Institute proposes a new way to do basic science outside academia. And we are developing true quantum instruments to look at true quantum degrees of freedom inside biology and to either unambiguously prove or refute a quantum to biology link.
And it's quite a new institute, isn't it? What made you set it up?
So the institute was founded less than a year ago, and we're really trying to experiment with new modalities of funding, with new ways of doing science. And I think that the operation is quite special. Right now, we're 6 scientists, 4 physicists and 2 biologists, and we work side by side in a way that I find very exciting and very unusual. Another novelty that is coming up soon is the fact that our institute is a non-profit, and we want to try and pioneer an open way of doing science. Very soon, we hope all our data, all our scientific operation is going to be put online. For example, our electronic lab notebooks are going to be online for anyone in the internet to see and in real time.
And is it an institute for people just living in the Los Angeles area, or are you, more global than that?
We are very much looking forward to collaborating with people from across the globe, because one of the missions of the Institute is really to foster quantum biology and to bring it to the mainstream.
And your own background, what took you to quantum biology? Because I think you started off doing an engineering degree.
That's correct. I started off doing an engineering degree, and in my first year of my studies in engineering, I got an internship in a theoretical physics group, and my then mentor put me to learn quantum physics, which you all know is the coolest thing in the entire world. And from then, it was really non-linear journey. I started my training in the field of quantum computing and technological quantum sensing, and then by chance I learned that there's evidence that some electrons inside proteins, they act as bona fide quantum sensors as well. So the idea has always since then been to explore those nature-made quantum sensors in a way so that we can tune biology using those endogenous quantum knobs.
Well, as you said, it's a long route, but because you had to learn some biology as well, I imagine.
I'm still learning.
Okay. And Paul, how about you? I mean, you're a theoretical physicist and you've come into quantum biology. Where did that come from?
Right, yes. Well, you may well ask. So to a physicist, life looks like a miracle, magic matter. And biologists tend to not see it that way because it's their subject matter. But to a physicist, the things that life does, living organisms do, just looks totally astounding. And so, of course, it's natural to think, well, what's going on there? That's the first thing. And secondly, how did it all start? How did physics and chemistry turn into biology, the origin of life? And so for me, it goes way back to when I was a student and I read Schrödinger's little book. Now, Erwin Schrödinger was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and this was a theory which, within a very few years, explained the nature of matter, all the way from subatomic particles up to astrophysics. But it left out living matter. What was living matter? That was a deep mystery. And so the founders of quantum mechanics in the 1930s were deeply puzzled by the nature of living matter. They thought maybe quantum mechanics could explain it, or maybe it needed something beyond quantum mechanics. And Schrödinger wrote a famous book. It was published in 1944 called What is Life? And having read that as a student, I thought, well, yes, it is totally amazing. And I'm still amazed. And the question is, will quantum mechanics explain it all, or do we need to go beyond quantum mechanics, or is it quantum mechanics plus something else? We just don't know at this stage.
And I'm watching Clarice nodding as you're mentioning the book. Do you think it's still relevant? Would you recommend it to students nowadays?
Yes.
Yes, it's a very slim book, and it was remarkable in many ways because it was based on a course of lectures that Schrödinger gave in Dublin, in Ireland, in 1943, when the rest of the world was engulfed in World War II. Schrödinger was out of this. He was thinking about, contemplating on this deep problem of the nature of life, and it was very, very influential in what we would now call the molecular biology revolution, which really began in the early 1950s. And so people read that book and they were deeply influenced by it. And Schrödinger was able to show that you couldn't understand life without quantum mechanics, but he wasn't able to show that quantum mechanics was all you needed for life. So we still have that mystery all these years on.
And hopefully that's a question we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah,
because it's so exciting. But meanwhile, the subject of quantum biology, I think, means different things to different people. So I wonder what your take is on it, Clarice.
So yes, I agree with that. And I think we need to make a distinction between quantum for biology and quantum in biology, right? So for the past 1 or 2 decades, there have been many efforts towards using quantum technologies like quantum sensors or quantum computers in order to learn more about biology, in order to get information, usually classical information, from biology. In contrast, there's this notion that biology might run on quantum. And for that, that's my definition of quantum biology. It's the extent to which quantum defines the way that biology acts macroscopically. It's quite cool, actually, because it's a scale shifting phenomenon whereby things that happen very fast at very tiny length scales end up having an effect that is macroscopic and at much longer timescales of interest for biology.
And do you agree with Clarice, Paul?
Yes, because people will use this term quantum biology quite generally. And if it refers to quantum devices like quantum sensors in the service of biology or medical applications, then that's enormously important. And I think there's going to be that to be a huge growth area in the coming years. Already is, and there's obviously a lot of money being invested in it, a lot of money to be made from it. What interests me is really the other aspect. It's how much is quantum mechanics needed to understand the nature of life. It is, when we look at a few phenomena where there clearly are quantum effects at work in biology. And by quantum effects, I don't just mean basic chemistry. I mean weird stuff like tunneling and entanglement and all these other oddities that come into quantum mechanics. There are cases where that does play a role in biology, but are these just a few quantum quirks that life has acquired on the evolutionary way, or is it the tip of a quantum iceberg? Is it the case that we will never understand life without a thoroughgoing understanding of quantum processes down at the most basic level? I think that's still an open question. That's the one that interests me.
And if I may, I think there's also another angle, because there's more and more evidence, as Paul was describing, that there are endogenous quantum knobs in biology. And I think there is a huge potential that we can learn how to tune those knobs for function. It's
so such as what? Where would you find them?
Well, if you ask me, I think they're found everywhere. So there are many flavors of potential flavors of quantum biology, some of which Paul mentioned, for example, the influence of tunneling. My favorite flavor of quantum biology has to do with the sensitivity of biology to tiny magnetic fields on the order of those produced by your cell phone or even by the magnetic field of the Earth.
What you mean to say we would feel somehow we'd sense these magnetic signals given off by our cell phones
not
and
that we
watches.
would sense those magnetic fields in the sense that birds probably do by navigating using them, but I am ready to bet that first of all, I am sure that in all your cells and in all cells throughout the tree of life, from bacteria to humans, there are proteins that can sense magnetic fields. We have the hardware. If the hardware is connected to a software, I don't know. I don't believe that cells in general are hooked up to sense magnetic fields to navigate in particular, but there are proteins in all our cells that can do this, and I think they might be sensing magnetic fields for function. For example, weak magnetic fields have been shown in a way consistent with this quantum mechanism to be able to change from how fast cells divide to how much energy is produced in a cell, how much DNA gets repaired, to how ionic channels get regulated. So I wonder if there isn't a way for us to learn how to engineer those magnetic fields so that we can turn those knobs at will.
So really, it might influence disease.
That's correct. Not only disease, but up to things as crazy as, well, if you want to colonize Mars, you probably need to know what the magnetic field on Mars is.
Well, there isn't much.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think are, the open questions in quantum biology, the things that you would really like to have answered? I mean, you've touched on some problems, but are they the biggest? What about you, Paul?
Well, I've become deeply intrigued by what we call biophotons. So it's been known for about 100 years that living tissues, living cells emit photons. Well, you might think, well, of course, everything emits photons at some level, but these are rather specific photons. I don't think there's any doubt that this happens, this phenomenon. Very low level of photon emission. And the question is, does it fulfill a biological function? Is there a reason that cells are emitting these photons? To put it bluntly, all of us glow in the dark. If you could put somebody in a totally dark room, they would
I was actually amazed when I heard that our cells were giving off photons.
Right.
I have a question for Paul.
Yes.
Paul, do you think it's a coincidence that our cells that are not exposed to the exterior, do you think it's a coincidence that their chromophores, their light absorption parts, have not been removed by evolution? Do you think the fact that in all our cells there's photon absorbing things could...
You think, why are they still there if they're not fulfilling a function? Is that
or
right?
could it be that they have not fallen off because biophoton absorption might still be a thing?
They're doing... it. Usually in biology, if something is retained and there's a cost, a metabolic cost in maintaining it, it's being selected for. It is fulfilling a function. That's not 100% true. It may be that some things it's easier to carry them along for the ride than to get rid of them. But generally speaking, that is the case. And what you have to do, you have to look at the genes that control those processes. So are there genes for biophotons? I have no idea. I'm sure there are. But if we could identify those genes, and then you look across many, many different species and say, well, does that gene have homologs among those species? Then you can go to a phylogenetic tree and say, oh, these genes are 3 billion years old or something. Right. So they're deeply rooted in the nature of biology. And then we begin to get to the bottom of this, how much do these quantum effects really matter in life? If they're very, very ancient, if it goes right back to the base of the tree of life, you can be pretty sure they're fulfilling literally vital function.
Well, there are magnetic field effects in bacteria, for example, in archaea. So is that enough proof?
Well, the question is whether the genes which are controlling the magnetic responses of bacteria are the same genes or homologs of the genes.
Oh, you would like to see them conserved.
In birds,
Got it.
for
Okay.
example.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's the case.
Okay.
So has anyone tried to look, follow these genes back in the different species, of, going back and back
well,
through the
there's
ages?
this title. There's this subject with the scary title of phylostratigraphy, and what that means is doing for genes what geologists do for rock strata.
That's cool.
So you go to the Grand Canyon, you see a stratigraphic sequence, and then you can date those. Do the same for genes. And so if you give me your favorite gene, then there are people I work with who can tell you, well, that one's 800 million years old, or it's 3 billion years old, and so on. This is a very new subject. I think it's a really important way of understanding what aspects of life are fundamental and what aspects are incidental. I wouldn't have expected, for example, to find that the genes that control the size of an elephant's trunk are very ancient. But if we're looking at things like pumping out toxins from cells, then that's something that is likely to go back 3.5 billion years. So I'd really like to know, with the limited number of quantum phenomena in biology that have been catalogued and are generally accepted, how old are the genes that underpin that?
Okay, it sounds like it's a research project
I
for
think
someone.
I'm throwing it out there. So for
Right.
maybe some of the young people here at the meeting would like to go for that.
Okay. Well, there's a question that's always puzzled me. I've always heard that quantum effects need, entanglement and the superposition, all these weird things that happen in quantum mechanics. They happen in, just cold places. It's very difficult to control them. How do you control some of the effects of quantum mechanics in a living body? I'll ask you, Clarice, first.
So the first part of the answer has to do with, in fact, quantum effects are around us everywhere already, even in places that are hot and messy. For example, of course, when people are building quantum technologies, they prefer to build them at extremely cold temperatures or in a vacuum where things are more organized. But there are quantum things that surround us. For example, your classical laptop only works because of a quantum phenomenon called tunneling, right?
And that gets hot anyhow.
Yeah, exactly, right. And lasers or magnetic resonance only work because of the laws of quantum physics. So quantum is already around us in our day-to-day life. It's not something that's only going to come in 30 years or so. But it is then somehow surprising to posit that quantum phenomena might retain their quantum character for long enough inside cells for them to matter. And I like to reframe everything in terms of time scales. I do think that in order for quantum bio to go to the mainstream, we really need to measure the time scales during which quantum phenomena can survive inside cells, because that actually puts bounds on the sensitivity of those phenomena, or of whether those phenomena can actually help biology work macroscopically.
Yeah. So Clarice is talking about the dreaded decoherence.
Yes.
And I think everybody knows that the term coherence is often used in quantum phenomena. A laser is a very good example. It's a coherent beam of light. The wave-like properties of quantum systems, and that applies to not just to photons, but to electrons and whole atoms as well, is absolutely critical to maintaining the quantum-like behavior. And generally speaking, that requires a small amount of external disturbance. The problem about living organisms is that they're warm and wet and very noisy environments. And then the difficulty is how they can maintain quantum coherence for long enough to do anything worthwhile. And this has been an argument against the possibility that quantum mechanics has something to do with consciousness, with its operating in the brain in such a way as to explain conscious experiences, that the rate of decoherence in the brain is much faster than the speed of thought. And so it looks like that's a total showstopper. But that's why I'm intrigued by these biophotons, because those decoherence rates largely apply to electrical operation in the brain. We tend to think the brain is an electrochemical system, and decoherence there is really pretty rapid. But if there are photons in the brain, and this is still very conjectural, if there are photons in the brain, then those decoherence arguments are somewhat weakened. But that's the battle you fight with quantum biology, that how we avoid the problem of decoherence.
Well, and you mentioned consciousness, which of course is, a really big topic, isn't it?
Where will we be without it?
I know. So you think now that possibly some quantum effects have something to do with it? Could it be? There's possibility now that you didn't think before.
Yes. So there's a deep philosophical connection between consciousness and quantum mechanics. It goes right back to the foundation of the subject, because quantum mechanics describes not a single real world, but a world that's made of blended alternative realities, that an amalgam of different possibilities. And the most famous case is Schrödinger's cat, live cat, dead cat. Talk about quantum biology, what better than Schrödinger's cat? So that's always been a puzzle, that it describes blended realities. But when you make an actual observation, the poor cat is either alive or dead. It's the one or the other. And that projection from an amalgam of both into a single either or is known as the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. It remains unsolved to this day. If what we're talking about is an observation or a measurement that's designed by an observer, an agent, if that's what we're talking about, then that's obviously a deep link right there, philosophically, between quantum physics and consciousness, or at least agency. That's the philosophical concept. But you can leap right into, well, are there some funny quantum goings-on in the brain that might explain conscious experience? And that's an idea goes way back many decades. It keeps getting recycled. It seems very hard to imagine it's going to happen involving electrons and ions in the brain because of the decoherence being so fast. But now with the possibility that photons might be involved, then I'm more open-minded about it. I'm still skeptical, but that skepticism is somewhat weakened.
What about you, Clarice? Got any ideas?
I have a question. Could a experiment be devised, or how would you devise an experiment to prove or refute that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because at the end of the day, experiment is what is going to determine this. I suppose one of the things... of course, it's a well-established procedure in neuroscience to sort of wire up your brain to something and see and give people different experiences and see what bits light up. And you can use electroencephalography or electromagnetoencephalography, various ways of probing what's going on in the brain. But if we could now look at the biophoton activity in the brain, and there have been some experiments already in this area, and then ask people, subject them to different experiences, ask them to do calculations, let them fall asleep, monitor the photon activity. So that's what we need. We need not the neural correlates of conscious experiences, but the photon, the neurophoton, if you like. I'm inventing this word. Neurophoton correlates of conscious experiences. And if there is a correlation, then it looks like the photon activity, the patterns of photons in your brain might have something to do with what you're experiencing. That for me would be very suggestive. I've no idea how you go about it. I mean, I'm a theoretical physicist. It's easier for me to say. All I know is that you would need money. It would need to be funded somehow. Well,
I think Clarice has got the institute. So, but Clarice, what about your own work? What are you doing?
So I am trained as an experimental quantum physicist, so we build instruments. And most of the instruments that we build have to do with probing the quantum property of spin that seems to be behind how biology reacts to magnetic fields. So what we believe is happening is that in some proteins, particular electrons can survive into a superposition of different spin states. And that superposition, if it lasts for long enough, can mediate how the protein quantum senses magnetic fields. And then that would explain how organisms react to magnetic fields and also how we would be able to actuate on biology by engineering magnetic fields.
Well, here's it might be a very stupid question, which I
There are no
think it
stupid
probably
questions.
is. Could cells exist without having quantum properties, do you think, without using them? Can you imagine? I mean, it might be a different form of life, but
I
do you
don't think so. I think that at the very basal level, cells are probably doing quantum things to survive. However, there's very little, apart from a lot of experiments in test tubes for like biocompounds and proteins that show that certain things only happen because of quantum phenomena happening at room temperature in solution. There aren't many true quantum measurements performed inside cells that go and probe those things. So one of the things that we try to do is build those instruments that will, in the near future, hopefully, be able to take some of those measurements. Because, again, we do believe that at the base, all cells are using quantum stuff in order to function and to function optimally.
I'm sure, I guess that's for life as we know it. Certainly, from what you're saying,
That's a
does
hypothesis
need
we need to
quantum
prove.
effects. But can you imagine, Paul, a type of life without quantum? Is it just too useful? Could it be without,
it's an interesting question you've asked, because I've never really thought about it. What I have thought about is, are there forms of life which would be, as it were, more quantum rather than less quantum? Are there places where the decoherence is less of an issue? And then it gets very speculative. There's some science fiction about, I'm not sure you call it life, but agency anyway on the surface of neutron stars, if you're prepared to go that far. The problem is, if you just go somewhere cold, like Pluto, and say, well, could there be life on Pluto? Might Pluto be better place to do it because it's colder and quantum effects would be more prominent? The difficulty is that the pace of chemical change is there, if assuming that we're still talking about chemistry as the substrate at least, that slows down so much that it could be that there are forms of life in which quantum effects are much more important, but it would be very sluggish and we might not even notice it. Might be just on a very long time scale. Don't know. But going in the other direction, could you have bigger, clunkier, less quantum-y forms of life? I think it's going to boil down to a definition of life, and then that could be a very long conversation. I wouldn't rule it out, though.
I have an issue with something that you said, because you seem to imply that of course, like when things are colder, more quantum is more probable. But there's tons of examples of like noise-assisted processes that already happen at room temperature. Don't you think that justifies already that? Don't you think that's very likely that quantum things are already happening at room temperature around us?
Yes.
Because nature has had like gazillions of years.
No, of course, there are quantum effects at room temperature. That's undeniable. And I suppose what I was really hinting at was, could I imagine something in which the quantum effects will be more important or more manifest? And then where do you go to look for that? In other words, is there Q life? Here we go. Q life out there somewhere in the universe. Where do we look? Do we look liquid helium temperatures or something out there, and we see Q life operating? And maybe life. I'm getting really conjectural here, but maybe life on Earth is a sort of it didn't begin in this warm, wet environment and the chemistry that we're used to, the biochemistry we're used to. Maybe it began as Q life, some sort of pure quantum form of life in some totally different context out there in the universe, and that what we see is a derivation from that, maybe something that occurred much later. That's a wild conjecture. I don't want it to be taken too seriously, but I have sometimes wondered whether life actually began with a fundamentally quantum process somewhere, and it was, and what we've got is a sort of later, more robust version of life. It's something which evolved much later on in order to be able to inhabit a much wider range of environments, like the surface of the Earth.
And in fact, you mentioned there about life getting going.
Yes.
But do you think quantum phenomena could have had something to do with life getting going? From, you have your stones and your inanimate objects, and then somehow we get life. I know it's a huge, huge mystery. Do you think quantum effects could have had something to do with it? Either one of you?
That's what Clarice? I was hinting at, but I'd like to know what
Clarice answer that one then.
I don't know. All that I'll say is that humanity got to quantum physics 200 years after the Industrial Revolution. Nature has had gazillions of years to get there. I think nature is probably the best quantum engineer around, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Right. And one of the things I've wondered, and that's quite right, I agree with you there, and one of the striking things about what has happened in the history of quantum mechanics, 100 years old, we had all these early technological applications. I think the laser and the transistor be classic examples. And what do we use them for? We use them for information processing, and the whole information technology revolution is predicated on quantum mechanics in its early version, quantum 1.0 we might call that. Now we're in the realm of quantum 2.0, quantum information science, where quantum mechanics is applied to the concept of information itself, and we talk about qubits being the quantum analog of the bit, the informational bit, and a quantum computer manipulates qubits. So then the question is, did life discover that as well? Life is fundamentally about information processing. Life is not just hardware, it's software as well. And is it the case that living organisms are not just storing, replicating and managing bits, but qubits as well? Could quantum information processing be going on in living organisms? That's a great leap, I think. I'd love to believe it was the case, but convince me if you think that's the case.
So I'll make a small distinction between quantum sensing and quantum computing. Right. I again would bet, I'm betting in my career that quantum sensing is active in biology. That is quantum information in the same way that a technological quantum sensor would acquire. I think that's being used in biology. I am still not convinced that quantum computing is happening in biology.
Right. Now, if it was, of course, that would be a money spinner for sure, because it's the race to build a fully functional quantum computer is consuming billions and billions of dollars. If we found that nature had figured out a way to do it in the warm, wet environment of a living organism, then you would certainly be onto something. I don't see any evidence for that yet, but it's an intriguing thought.
So that just brings me around to my next topic I want to actually put to Clarice. That brings me around to my next question, skepticism. Clarice, do you encounter a lot of skepticism about quantum biology?
Yes, and again, haters gonna hate. And I think that quantum biology has not breached to the mainstream yet because of the lack of causal evidence that biology runs on quantum. And I mean, it goes without saying that we're trying to address this. We're trying to perform true quantum measurements inside cells to quantify some things so that I think you can counter skepticism with data, right? And that's been our approach. I'm trained as a physicist, but physicists are the worst, no, Paul?
Well,
I think that physicists sometimes they tend to not want to engage with data and to engage with data that counter their training. So my remedy to skepticism is keep on producing data, keep on sharing your science, and let's see what it takes us.
Well, absolutely right. I think skepticism is a healthy approach in science always, and I always call myself an interested skeptic. That I'm fascinated by all sorts of things. I think maintaining a healthy skepticism is the right approach, but a dismissive skepticism is intolerable. And I think a lot of people, when confronted by things like quantum biology, they just shrug it aside. I don't believe that. There's nothing to that. It's all a lot of nonsense, and that is not the right approach in science. It's to, as Clarice says, is to look at the data carefully with an open mind, but always maintaining a skeptical stance. Always in science, if you have a new set of ideas, they should be battle tested against a skeptical community, and if they survive those battles, if they win those battles, then that gives you greater confidence that you're dealing with something
but Paul,
solid.
That's forgetting that science is political because it's made by people. Sometimes the motives of people are not purely scientific.
We like to think that scientists are humble, open-minded, and prepared to change their minds when the data suggests otherwise. Very rare, in my experience, that scientists actually say, well, for 20 years I've thought X, and now I think Y. I was wrong. Does happen occasionally, but mostly they cling to their initial beliefs. So individual scientists, I agree, are not very humble, but the scientific community as a whole will often put up resistance to something, but then it'll flip.
One death at a time.
There are many examples in history, and just think of something like plate tectonics, continental drift. Years and years people said it's impossible for continents to float around on the surface of the Earth, and then within a few years suddenly, yes, of course it happens. And so maybe we'll reach that flipping point, tipping point, with quantum biology sometime soon. People will say, right, yes, this clearly is a field. It's been struggling to get out for a few decades. Now it looks like the evidence is compelling that there's a lot going on here, and we should get behind it and develop it and commercialize it, probably.
Well, it sounds like there's a whole lot to talk about at this meeting. So, Clarice especially, what message do you want to get out to the young people here at the meeting and to scientists in Brazil and around the world more generally?
Okay, my first message is about quantum physics. So quantum physics is already around us everywhere. I do think that learning a little bit of quantum physics should be a universal right, because it helps you so much to understand the world around us. So young people out there, go look for free classes on quantum physics in the internet. I think you have a lot to gain. The other thing has to do with interdisciplinary science. I do think that the most exciting science in our times is going to come from subjects that touch on each other, where barriers dissipate. And I think quantum biology is a very nice example of that.
And the final word, Paul?
Oh, well, I never cease from saying that it's really important that young people should go into physics because it's such a wonderful subject. So yes, my recommendation for all students is that they study physics, and quantum mechanics is the most successful physical theory that we've ever had. So everybody should get to know something about it. But I guess that the sentiment I would most like to impart to the students here is that focusing on foundational questions in science, like what is life, how does it work, what is matter, what's the relationship between life and matter, and consciousness, and how is it that we have agency in the world, how do all these things coexist in the world? Focusing on those foundational questions is a wonderful motivation for doing science. You shouldn't spend your life trying to answer those questions because they're really, really difficult, but to be motivated by that, to go into science, I think that would be my message to young people.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed my time talking to you, and I've actually learnt a lot. So thank you so much, Clarice Aiello and Paul Davies.
Thank you, Pauline, for having us.